Well, hey everyone, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm glad I hopped on a little earlier so I could watch the presentation before, which was awesome. So thank you so much for the work that Humble Design is doing. It's amazing for my home area down in San Diego, where I'm originally from, and where most of my family is from actually. And I'm really privileged and honored to be here. This was supposed to be my executive director speaking to you all, who I should say, I wish it was him, just because for your sake, he is an amazing person and has his own amazing story as a formerly incarcerated individual who is now the ED of my organization, which is one of the largest, maybe the largest criminal justice organization in California, and also we have a national arm as well. But he's out on paternity leave starting yesterday, so he's expecting his second baby boy. So you all get me, but honored to be here. And when I met with Martin a few weeks ago now to talk about this opportunity, I was really excited. I'm familiar a little bit with Mustard Seed, and then familiar with obviously the areas that you all are located at in Riverside and then San Diego. Being from San Diego and then attending the University of Redlands, which is just right up the street from where River UCR is. And then working for Assembly Member Shirley Weber, who is some of your representatives if you're attending SDSU, and depending on where you're living in San Diego. So really privileged to be here. And I wanted to start off by saying, kudos to you all for doing this work. This is not easy work. This is heart work, which we say, heart and hard work. Big shout out to you all, and I hope you all remember that. I know we don't all necessarily do this work because we're getting big shout outs, or you're going to be making a lot of money eventually. You're doing this because it's the right thing, and your heart's telling you, this is where you belong right now. So, thank you for what you all are doing. And so, I'm hoping to shed a little bit of light on like kind of how I got to where I am now, which I have really, to tell you the truth, like no idea. I would have never guessed when I was in college that this is where I'd be. I didn't think I'd ever leave Southern California, which was my home and still has my heart. So I hope to kind of give you a sense of how I got to where I am, and in doing so also showing you, the path can go a lot of different ways and take you a lot of different ways, especially if you're kind of open to what life throws at you. I'm going to talk a little bit about criminal justice and the interconnection of homelessness with it, because obviously that's the work that you all are really focused on. And then, really talk about what it's like to be in state politics and lobbying and doing advocacy work, because, a lot of you are going to be doing that on local levels, just as an advocate for folks that you are working with. You may not be lobbying to, the state governor directly, but you could be lobbying to, individuals that work at businesses, individuals at city council, your state representatives like Shirley Weber. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I have about 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, and then always willing to talk afterwards with anyone that is interested. But I'll just jump in, and I hope I don't have a presentation. I was going to just talk. I as a social worker, I love storytelling, and I love to share and listen, and be vulnerable and open. So I'll just dive in. So like I said, I'm from San Diego, California, really the North County part of San Diego, up in the San Marcos, Escondido area. I went to the University of Redlands, and originally I wanted to be a high school math teacher. So I started out going to Redlands to play football and to be a high school math teacher. So I started out as a math major, and quickly realized that math was a lot harder in college than it was in high school and middle school. And that also, I learned that I didn't need to actually be a math major to be a high school math teacher, and that I wasn't super interested in the math classes I was taking. So I quickly changed to psychology and race and ethnic studies because, to be honest and vulnerable with you all, I struggled with anxiety and depression. I had a few severe bouts of depression growing up, 5th grade, sophomore year of high school, and then my sophomore year in college. And so I studied psychology because I really wanted to kind of just understand what was going on with myself and mental illness, and reduce stigma around being a brown man who struggled with depression and anxiety. And so through studying psychology and getting really involved in college, which is another thing, I'm really glad that you all are doing this work, because that's kind of how I found part of my path and direction. And I met folks who were doing things that I was interested in. And so, at the University of Redlands, I was really involved in social justice clubs, diversity organizations, and I ended up volunteering through a juvenile justice group at the University of Redlands. And so I went into the San Bernardino Juvenile Hall once a week for my whole junior and senior year, and actually spent more time my senior year because of my senior capstone project for psychology. And it was there in the juvenile justice system that my mind really opened up. My heart really opened up, to tell you all the truth. I think as an 18 and 19-year-old, kind of growing up actually in a little bit more of a, I'd say, closed-minded, conservative community, I kind of always thought people were good or bad. And I didn't think about experiences. I didn't think about environments. And really volunteering as a 20-year-old with some kids that were, 16, 17, almost getting ready to be 18, close to my age in the juvenile hall, I quickly realized I very easily could have been an individual who was incarcerated. And I quickly realized that it didn't necessarily have to do with the person's heart. A lot of it had to do with the environment and the situation and circumstances. And a lot of this was so much out of control of our children, right? And so my mind really opened up, and I realized I needed to do everything in my power to make sure children were cut off before they got to a place of being put in the juvenile hall. So literally the first day I walked out of the juvenile hall after my first day volunteering, I cried, and I vowed to do everything in my power moving forward to reduce the stigma and to reduce the school to prison pipeline, and then just to kind of reduce the criminal justice system. And really, I had big dreams of one day shutting down the juvenile justice system or playing a part in that. I'll talk about policy in a second, but I do want to say a big win happened this year. It just happened 2 weeks ago. The state has committed, and the governor should be signing it any day now, to shutting down the state's juvenile justice system. They're going to shut it down and shift children back to the counties, which still means kids are going to be potentially placed in local juvenile halls, but that's a huge win in the sense that they're going to keep them closer to home. And now it changes the fight to just, instead of closing just the state ones, we're going to close the local ones next, right? So this is a huge win that I don't think people thought 10 years ago when I was doing this volunteer work we were ever going to see. But so I just want to announce that and say, that's a direct tie-in to things 10 years ago I was talking about wanting to be involved in, and I got to help lobby for this year. I got to help push elected officials to vote for this year. And so it happened, right? I spoke it into the universe, I believe. So yeah, really quickly, I'll fast forward a little bit. I decided through that volunteer experience, I wanted to be a social worker because I met social workers in the juvenile hall who I thought were doing amazing work. I went and pursued my degree to be a therapist originally, and then to try to work my way through probation. Obviously, that didn't happen. I changed midway through my grad school experience to focus kind of more on programmatic. And still didn't really want to do policy work, y'all. I wanted to really focus on the local level, local governments and programs and intervention work. But something was calling me. A friend, which is something I'm going to share a little bit later about, I think, tips for you all as you're doing this work. But a friend who knew me really well said, hey, I think you should look into this like fellowship. You're always talking about how the state isn't doing the right thing, isn't looking into research, isn't funding the right things. I think you should look into this fellowship, and you should go see, make some noise up there, and if you get it. So I did. I listened to my friend. Luckily I have good friends that I listen to, and know me well. And I got this fellowship, right? I got this fellowship a couple years ago. I'd already been in the field, and I essentially started my whole career over again at the age of 27. Left home, moved here to Sacramento, not knowing really anyone, and not knowing anything really about state politics or state government. I didn't even know who my elected official was. I was a social worker who was doing like therapy and like very local level work. And so I think one of the lessons I want you all to think about and know is like, it's okay to be scared doing this work. And it's okay not to be an expert. I've been doing this work for 5 years and I still don't feel like an expert. And I came up here with the intent of just trying to do as much good as possible. And I've been lucky enough to, to work for some amazing people, individuals, and to partner with individuals and really follow my value system around social justice, right? And understanding like everyone has a role to play. Like you all have a role to play with where you're at right now. And you have the ability to do good and to love individuals like everywhere you're at right now. And like, to me, like it's corny, but like that's the system I have to operate from, because it seems like there's so much harm and bad in the world right now. But I can control like the good I can do right now, you know? And so like, I'm nervous talking to you all, right? Like, but I'm hoping that someone listening right now is going to take something that I say in the next 10 minutes, and it'll help you in the next couple of days, the next couple of weeks, or maybe it'll click in a couple months, or maybe as you're getting ready to graduate, it'll click. You know, that's all I can hope for, right? That's all I can do is if I'm putting positive out into the world. So that's really kind of like who I am and my operating system. The other thing I want to share, and this is kind of, I want to move us into a little bit of the criminal justice, homelessness conversation. I do criminal justice work, not so much because I love it, y'all. I don't necessarily love having to like fight law enforcement on issues or fight folks that like, you know, think everyone that commits a crime is a horrible person. Like, I don't love that work. Like, I would much rather be doing the personal trainer stuff that I do on the side, like full time. I'd much rather actually be teaching youth or working in a mentoring program. But I feel responsible to this work. And I specifically feel responsible to criminal justice work because I believe criminal justice, unfortunately, is kind of that catch-all of all of our social injustice in the world, all of the social ills. It all kind of funnels into the criminal justice system, right? And that's why I really do this work. Like, I love education work. I actually really do care about like economic justice, but I think if I want to be able to work on all those issues, criminal justice is kind of where all of them funnel into. And so, you know, thinking about the work that you all do around serving those that are, you know, struggling with housing and homelessness, which is obviously extremely prevalent in this entire country, but also in California, you know, thinking about like, there's close to 50,000 individuals, like almost like every other day or so, that are like coming out of the prison system and jail system that are going to face homelessness, right? I know a survey that I looked up actually recently for this talk said like about 15% of people polled on the daily in jails, and this is in state prison, in jails, have reported being homeless at one point or another, right? And homelessness, you know, has a lot of issues combined and connected to it, right? And like I said, unfortunately, the criminal justice, you know, touches these folks because they're the ones on the streets. They are the ones that are struggling to get by, or they're the ones living in their cars who may not always have something to eat, right? And because our social safety nets have been so collapsed and underfunded over the years, you know, the criminal justice system tends to be the one that catches those individuals that are struggling with housing, right? Housing insecurity. Also struggling with mental illness. Like, you can't not talk about homelessness without talking about some mental illness and the way we treat folks that have struggles with mental illness. Well, unfortunately, you know, LA County's jail is considered the largest mental health institute in the country, right? And like, if you think about that, folks that are already hurting and struggling, being surrounded in an environment where there are some folks that, you know, have done other harms to individuals, and then you have guards walking around with guns. That's not a presence to heal folks, right? So, you know, what my organization does doesn't directly work on housing, but, you know, we work on a lot of different issues around safety, around community wellness, around removing barriers for folks that are formerly incarcerated, right? So Californians for Safety and Justice we're a statewide organization that does policy advocacy work and budget advocacy here in Sacramento. And we're starting to really try to look at the executive branch and then also local level stuff. We also do campaign work. So there's a couple propositions on the ballot that, you know, some of you or if the majority of you are able and eligible to vote, will be voting on, right? So Prop 20 is a proposition we're directly opposing right now. Proposition 17 is one that we're supporting and helping work on. Prop 25 is one that we're helping support and work on. So, you know, my organization touches a little bit of everything, but really where it starts, and which is, I think, a big connection to what you all are doing, is, you know, we center our constituents at the work, right? And so we organize formerly incarcerated individuals and then organize survivors of crime and survivors of violence. So we organize these two groups, also understanding that there's overlap with them, because generally hurt people have hurt other people. And it's generally why you see this cycle of violence and hurt and trauma, because they're just kind of passing it along because we're not doing a good enough job of healing folks. So our organization works with individuals on the ground. We have a chapter in San Diego, and I'm pretty sure we have at least 1 or 2 chapters in Riverside, San Bernardino, of survivors and formerly incarcerated folks. And so we work with these individuals on the daily to hear from them what their needs are. What are the barriers that they're facing? And then how do we take that and we turn that into policy or budget advocacy, right? I want to say something, y'all, because I think people think policy and writing laws are like really cool and sexy, and it is pretty cool to be involved in that. But like budget is where it's at, y'all. Like if you haven't heard this saying yet, you're gonna hear it as you continue to get older. Budget is a reflection of your values, and so like where real policy gets done is where the money is at and where the money is getting put. And it's like, I'm not going to get too political on this topic or talk a lot about it because my org doesn't do necessarily police reform, but defund the police. That's why you're hearing that conversation right now. It's because people are looking at the budgets of police at the state and county or the city and county levels and saying, hey, they're getting a disproportionate amount of the share. That money should be going to social services or education, right? So that we don't need to invest as much in the safety on the back end. Because police, if you think about it, and sheriffs and prison guards, they're not doing the preventative work. They're responding and reacting to when there's already difficulties and challenges. My job is to be like, okay, how do we look at the reintegration of folks? And then how do we also prevent folks from entering the system in the first place, right? So, I think a lot of my work is really making sure that local elected officials and state officials understand these different connections with economic justice, environmental injustice, housing insecurity, mental health issues, and how that contributes to our bloated criminal justice system, and how too often our criminal justice system is not taking folks in and making them better when they come out or making communities any safer, right? So I have a few more minutes. I was told to talk a little bit about kind of the struggles around lobbying and then just being in the nonprofit world. I think the speaker before me shared some great stuff around self-care. What I want to highlight really quick is understanding that like it's okay to feel exhausted. It's okay to not be an expert. And something that like personally I struggle with doing this work in criminal justice is that I don't have the lived experience of the criminal justice system, right? And so there's times when like that hasn't never really been held against me, but like internally I have to fight my own struggles. And that then though places me in that position of always centering back on the clients, the constituents, right? So whether you've ever been, like in your example, homeless or not, it's okay if you haven't been. Like center the needs of the folks that you're working with, right? The person before was talking about, I think a social work tenet actually is meet the client where they're at, right? And so although I'm not an expert on these issues, the individuals that we represent are. And it's not my job to be, the loudest voice in the room. It's the job of me to make sure those folks that have those lived experiences have that opportunity to be the loudest voice in the room. And maybe they don't need to be the loudest. Maybe they're the one talking the most softly, and that's making people listen even more, right? Like if things get quiet, you're like, oh, why did it get quiet? Well, this person's got a real story to tell, right? And so my job is as an advocate and a lobbyist really is to just figure out how to tell a story effectively to get the narrative across around passing a law, right? So, lobbying is hard. I'm not going to lie, y'all, being in politics, especially the last 4 years, I came in right as a certain situation, environment change at the federal level, right? And it's definitely trickled down. And what I have to do is to avoid kind of burnout is always checking in with myself, always reflecting on why I do this work. And also understanding that, like, I think I said at the beginning, everyone has a role to play, right? Like, I have to trust that you all like are doing like great work on homelessness issues, right? And I believe you all are, right? I have to trust that there's folks that are doing a great job in the education system, right? Because if I start to think about all the problems and how I'm only one person, it becomes really daunting. And then for me, it immobilizes me, right? But if I remember that there's folks like you all, if there's folks like I have good friends in other lobbying fields that are doing that work, that interconnectedness, it rejuvenates me, right? So, there's going to be times, y'all, when, especially now, you're feeling alone in this work. But remember, like, I truly believe there's a lot more of us that are fighting for what we believe is right than there are that's pushing against us, right? It's just, we're really fighting against a system that people say is broken, but, I truly believe was designed this way. If you look at, right, the history of the country. And so we're just fighting against, hundreds of years of injustice. And that it's going to take, decades at least, and maybe hundreds of more years to undo this injustice. But I believe I'm truly setting others up, just like they did before me, to do this work. So, it's okay to feel alone, but know that you're not. And then lastly, I wanted to just share, a few things that I tell folks in this work, and individuals that, like, I tend to, like, train and mentor and work with, right? There's only really two things in my mind that you can control: how hard you work and how well you treat people. There's really not a whole lot of other things that you can control in this world, right? And so that's how I try to center myself almost every day, right? Is every interaction I have is like, how am I treating this person? Because how I'm treating them is a reflection of me. How they're treating me is a reflection of them. And it's not necessarily a reflection on me. And then how hard I work, right? Like, it's okay to take breaks. And that could be working hard at taking care of yourself, right? And so always remembering, like, what can you control today at this moment right now? And, like, how is that, aligning with your values? Lastly, I'm really big on quotes. My Instagram, my Facebook, I post a quote every day. I've been doing quotes every day. I have a library of over 1,000 quotes. I want to share, I think, 2 quotes I wrote down for you all that, like, really make me think about the work that I do. And I think in general, it can relate to just life in general, right? So the first quote comes from a book that I highly recommend. Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. They turned it into a movie with Michael B. Jordan. So if you've seen that, great. If you've read the book, you'll know it's even better than the movie. But the quote goes like this. It's really short. Each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. And so I think about that quote often when I'm literally working with folks that, like, I represent and speak for, that I know have committed some horrible crimes. Like, I have worked with an individual that murdered someone actually at SDSU when he was the same age as me. And he has reformed his life and has now worked to undo the harm, and he knows he can never bring someone back, right? But I recognize that I could have been him at some point if I had made a wrong decision, or if I had been drinking one night at one party and made a bad decision, right? And so I try to always center myself on that quote. And then this other quote from an individual, I don't know his name, but I met him at San Quentin when I was doing some volunteer work there. And he said this in a spoken word piece. I live in a world that kill people who kill people in order to teach people that killing people is wrong. Imagine that. Better yet, imagine a world where healed people help hurt people heal and become strong. Maybe then we would all be singing redemption song. And I use this one to remind myself on those days when I'm like really struggling and really feeling beaten down. And sometimes agreeing with the opposition's argument about, like, why some folks maybe should never see the light of day, right? Why some folks that have committed, sexual or violent crimes don't deserve rehabilitation, right? I remind myself that, if we're not actually healing folks, we're just going to continue this cycle of poverty, of violence, of housing insecurity, of education achievement gaps. So I'm at around my time. I think I can go a few more minutes if we want to take questions. I know I just shared a lot. Martin has my contact information too. I can put it in the chat. I know I didn't get into specifics about criminal justice policy. There's a lot to talk about. It was a huge year, not a big enough year on housing, to be honest with you all. And the state is still really struggling with figuring out how we do housing policy. But criminal justice had a really big year, other than kind of police reforms, which has its own dynamic outside of some of the other criminal justice stuff. But I'm always happy to talk offline. But I can stay and take a few questions if there are some. But just again, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share some words with you all. I know I just talked for a long time at you all, and I appreciate you all listening. I could see on the chat. And it's just good to be in fellowship with folks that are also got their hearts doing this important work.
So before we get to questions, I just wanted to thank Anthony for all the work that he does. It's really often, especially in the US, that people who have been incarcerated are often overlooked and really villainized. And I really appreciate, and everyone at MSP really appreciates, that you're really working to help them and break a lot of stigmas. And also thank you for sharing tips on how to navigate politics as a nonprofit. That was very helpful. So when we get to questions, so unfortunately, Esty had to leave, but she left her email in our chat. So if you have any questions for her, then you can email her. And then for questions, I will be, I guess, moderating. So if you have a question, if you click on the participants button at the bottom of the Zoom call, you'll get like a side menu, and then press raise hand if you would like to ask a question, and then I can call on you. Yeah, so we can start questions now. Okay, first question, Cecily.
Hello, thank you so much for talking to us. My question was just, so I have some experience. I interned with Assemblymember Filting, and I have some experience lobbying as well. And in my experience, it gets pretty frustrating because it feels like you're saying the same thing over and over again, and sometimes it feels like no one's listening. So I was wondering, how do you stay motivated and hopeful that what you're doing is working in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think for me, it's reframing like what the wins are, right? So I'll use an example. The federal government obviously did their one stimulus package as of now, which is, I'm not gonna say too much, but also mind-boggling. But one stimulus package, and the state got a whole lot of money, which is great. But they had it in different pots, right? And so we were being told for some criminal justice money, 58 million or so was going to go to this board. The way the board was, which is a state-run kind of group, the way the board was interpreting this money was that it could only go to local governments, and traditionally funding like this has always only gone to law enforcement. Well, my organization really read like the grant, the RFP, and we said no. Like actually, this money could go to CBOs, nonprofits like you all that are meeting the requirements, but nowhere does it say like CBOs can't apply. They were just interpreting it that way because that's how they always have. Which you'll learn, y'all, as you start working with folks in government. For the most part, they all like have good intentions, but they all want to cover their asses. And they always kind of do things like how it's always been done. Oh, y'all are recording this, huh? Well, okay. Excuse my language, but just gonna be real, y'all. I used to work in government, and I know how that feels like when you're like, oh wait, I don't want to be the one on the bottom of the cog who interpreted something one way, and then actually it's wrong, and then I'm in trouble, whatever. So we had to do a lot of advocacy, right? And over months, we were pushing this board to commit to like funding CBOs almost 100% through this funding. We got 40 other organizations to submit a coalition letter. We did a bunch of public comment. They actually opened it up to potentially doing CBOs. So we were like, oh, okay, so they're actually listening to us. Well, they just made a ruling, and they said 20% of the funding at minimum has to go to CBOs. Well, when my folks read that, they were really pissed and really sad and really frustrated, right? Because we wanted all the money to go there, and we still do. But I had to take a step back and be like, look where we started like 3 months ago, where they were telling us, no, this money wasn't going to go to CBOs at all. And in short time, in 2 months, we organized folks. We spoke out at board meetings and submitted letters. And now they're saying at least minimum 20%, right? And there has to be CBO representation on this advisory body that you have to create to give out the money, right? So like, that's not like the best win, but it's a win. And so it's like remembering that like wins, like start the momentum and also build those relationships, right? This coalition came together like that. And so it's like looking at those little nuggets, those little wins that you got, right? And in lobbying and advocacy, I'll tell you this, I didn't share this. I should have shared this, y'all. As a social worker, I definitely should have shared it. But like relationships change the world. Like truly, like the work that you're doing is relationship based. Like, yeah, your job is going to be hopefully to get these folks services and help, but they can only trust you if the relationship is strong. And the same thing in advocacy and lobbying. Like, yeah, you're like the information, the research that you share, the policies that you're pushing matter, But like, if the person you're talking to advocate for doesn't believe in the relationship, doesn't trust the relationship, you're not going to get anywhere. I got Republicans this year to vote for some criminal justice stuff that people were like, yeah, they'll never support that. Well, it's because I spent time building a relationship and speaking the language that like makes sense for like these individuals. And that just all had to do with understanding them and understanding what the relationship brings for each folks, because that's really what lobbying and advocacy is. It's a relationship. It could be a very like 10, 15-minute relationship, but like, what are you bringing to that relationship? So those are some things that I center myself around when it comes to lobbying.
Okay, thank you for the question, Cecily. So we have one more question, and is going to be asked by Jade. So Jade, whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for speaking, and it was definitely nice to hear you talk. You kind of just partially answered what I was gonna ask. Like, how do you handle people that are like confrontational, or people that you know, don't have the same mindset as you, and how kind of do you like build a bridge and like create that relationship, especially when someone is like very different minded from you? And then can you also repeat the name of your fellowship and like the one that you were saying works in San Diego?
Yeah. Yeah. So the fellowship is the Capital Fellows Program. And so the Capital Fellows Program is a program that you can start applying as you're getting ready to graduate. I was a little bit, I was one of the older folks. You know, I had been out of undergrad and grad school. But the Capital Fellows Program places individuals either in a Senate office, an assembly office, or an executive branch. And there's also a judicial fellowship that's tied to it, but it's a little bit of a smaller program. But applications usually open in like October or November, and the deadlines are usually in February. And then you would start, see if you were to graduate like in May and you got it, you would start in October. So the new class is about to start right now. So yeah, I did that fellowship for a year and then transitioned into Assemblymember Shirley Weber, who is the representative down there for the 79th district. She represents SDSU. I don't think she touches UCSD. I want to say that might be Assemblymember Todd Gloria, who's running for San Diego mayor. But there's some great elected officials, y'all, down in San Diego and in Riverside. So if you're, you know, looking for opportunities to intern, you know, definitely hit me up after this. I can put you in contact with, you know, folks there. Can you repeat your first question? Sorry, I got excited talking about the fellowship program.
Yeah. How do you kind of orient yourself?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, those relationships.
Yeah. You know, to tell you the truth, it's actually a lot easier to do it in my professional life than in my personal life. I mean, I think some of it in my professional life is because like the mindset is like, I already kind of start off if I generally know that I'm talking to someone that may not agree with me or may be on a different side of the coin. So like that always helps. I think it's always more jarring when in my personal life I'm talking to someone and all of a sudden I'm like, oh wait, we actually don't see eye to eye on this. Oh, I didn't know that. And then a lot of this can feel really personal, right? Because of what's going on and you know, the psychology behind certain issues and how they pertain to you and whatnot. And just really the humanity of some of these issues too. So I want to preface it with that like sometimes it's easier to just do the professional work because I have to be professional in the first place. But I think in general, you know, I've never gotten into like a shouting match. And I think that's because I'm very mindful of my tone and my body language. You know, I've been in conversations where, especially with law enforcement lobbyists, they try to use their body language to kind of intimidate. And you'll quickly realize like that's not going to affect me. I'm going to be very open, you know. So like I always try to like before one of these conversations, I go in being like, okay, I will not raise my voice. If my heart starts to race, I will, you know, breathe. I will always try to keep my body language open, you know, not trying to cross my arms, cross my legs, you know, because I think that signals to other folks like I'm open to listening, right? I will always try to validate and find kind of points of agreement. And when there's disagreement, I always try to center that not on the person themselves, but on like the actual topic or the issue, right? And so some of that has to do with, you know, knowing your facts, knowing your truths. I will never say something that I don't actually know or believe, right? And so this is something I had to learn, which kind of think goes back to like lobbying in general. Like saying, I don't know, or like, oh, that's okay, I'll get back to you type of things, like to quiet the conversation down, or to recognize like, yeah, I'm going to humble myself in a moment. Like that's okay too. But I will never let anyone walk over me, right? Like there will come times when I'm like, okay, this conversation it needs a halt, right? And we need to circle back too. And that's okay too, right? And so for me, it's always recognizing like when things start to feel personal, that like I need to bring it back to what's the professional goal, right? And I'll tell you, for the most part, at least in this space, it hasn't ever escalated there. And then lastly, ideally, you've done your homework and you know who you're talking to. You know that like this office is not the most friendly to this issue, or isn't supportive of this issue. And so, your expectations may be different, and you may just be going in to just share information and understand like, yeah, you may get a no, and that's okay too. There's a lot of different games that are played. And when I say that, I mean strategies when it comes to lobbying and advocating. And, oftentimes, at least in California, I'm fortunate enough that most folks are agreeing with me to an extent, or at least have a base level understanding. And then the folks that aren't, like, I'll just share information and, we'll circle back, and sometimes it's okay to plant a seed and water that, and know like 5 conversations from now, they may actually be with me, but they're not going to be with me. And that's okay right now too. A lot of these folks, especially staffers, like they're getting paid to represent their boss's voice. So, there's things that I try not to take personally against individuals as well.